The historical archives would later call it the most controversial hearing in human history. But in that moment, it was a crucifixion dressed in legal formalities. Captain Aria Chen stood motionless, her prosthetic left arm, a masterpiece of biomechanical engineering that pulsed with soft blue light, completely still. The arm was a relic from humanity's last encounter with the unknown, a reminder of why the Defiance mission was more than just another exploration attempt. 20 years earlier, Chen had been part of the first contact team with the Mercurial Swarm, a semi-intelligent technological entity that had consumed 3 outer colony worlds. She was the only survivor, her organic arm replaced by this quantum-responsive prosthetic that seemed to breathe with its own intelligence. The financial implications are staggering, droned Edwin Nakamura, lead counsel for the Interstellar Development Consortium. His holographic projection flickered, casting long shadows across the tribunal chamber. 12 billion credits invested in a ship that violates every known protocol of exploration. 12 lives risked on a mission with no guaranteed return. Behind Chen, the remaining crew of the Defiance sat in a tight cluster. They were not typical explorers. Dr. Imani Okoro, the team's xenolinguist, had been expelled from 3 academic institutions for theories that challenged fundamental understanding of communication. Next to her, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, brilliant quantum engineer and certified disaster, drummed his fingers in a complex rhythm that seemed to pulse with mathematical precision. Admiral Helena Reyes remained silent, her weathered face a map of scars that told stories of humanity's most dangerous missions. She had personally selected each member of the Defiance crew, knowing they represented something far more important than any corporate balance sheet or diplomatic agreement. A holographic projection materialized. Jantok, representative of the Galactic Collective, his crystalline form refracting light in impossible geometric patterns. Humanity continues to demonstrate why it remains the most dangerous unknown variable in our stellar calculations, he intoned, his voice a combination of subsonic vibrations and electromagnetic pulses. The chamber's environmental controls stuttered momentarily, a subtle reminder of the technological capabilities housed within the crew seated before the tribunal. Let me be explicit, Nakamura continued. The Defiance represents a violation of the stellar containment protocols. Its quantum adaptive hull technology could destabilize entire sectors of interstellar space. The risk is incalculable. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward, his eyes reflecting computational patterns that seemed to dance just beneath their surface. Risk is a function of limited understanding, he muttered, loud enough for the room to hear. Jantok's crystalline form pulsed with what might have been contempt, or perhaps something closer to fear. Your species has a history of turning potential extinction events into opportunities. The collective does not find this comforting. The chamber's tension was a physical thing, pressing against the walls, crackling with unspoken potential. Admiral Reyes finally spoke, her voice cutting through the diplomatic posturing like a quantum blade. The Defiance is not just a ship. It's humanity's response to a universe that believes it can be predicted, categorized, contained. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implications that stretched far beyond the immediate hearing. Captain Chen remained perfectly still, her prosthetic arm now subtly shifting its molecular structure, an unconscious response to the electromagnetic fluctuations in the room. To those who knew how to read such things, the arm was already gathering information, analyzing the complex interactions between the humans, the alien representative, and the technological systems surrounding them. The tribunal was more than a hearing. It was a battlefield, and humanity had always been most dangerous when cornered. As the legal arguments continued their elaborate dance, no one noticed the quantum encryption algorithms already spreading through the chamber's communication systems, a silent, invisible preparation for what was to come. The Defiance mission would happen, one way or another. The launch sequence began not with a roar, but with a whisper. Deep within the Defiance's core, quantum processors began a calculation so complex it would have shattered the minds of lesser computational systems. Dr. Imani Okoro stood at the linguistic interface, her hands moving in a dance that was part sign language, part mathematical notation, part something entirely new. "Containment fields are stabilizing," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the subtle hum of the ship's systems. "But they don't know what's really happening." The corporate security vessels closing in represented humanity's old guard, massive, angular ships bristling with conventional weaponry. They were relics of a paradigm that believed power came from destruction, not understanding. Lieutenant Kai Zhang, the ship's tactical specialist, wasn't running from a fight. He was preparing to redefine one. His interface was a living thing, biological circuits that merged seamlessly with his nervous system. Where traditional tactical displays showed weapons and target vectors, Zhang's interface revealed complex probability landscapes, potential interactions that existed between states of conflict and communication. "Incoming targeting locks," he said, his voice calm. "Watch." The corporate vessel's weapon systems began to fragment, not through any traditional electronic warfare, but through something far more insidious. Each targeting algorithm encountered impossible mathematical constructs, recursive loops that twisted computational logic into knots. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez laughed, not a sound of humor, but of pure scientific excitement. "They're using linear computational models against a quantum adaptive system," he explained to no one in particular. "It's like trying to capture water with a fishing net." The Defiance's hull was never truly solid. Billions of microscopic adaptive cells continuously reconfigured, creating a surface that was simultaneously matter and information. As the corporate vessels fired their first salvos, the ship's exterior simply remembered a different configuration. Plasma bolts passed through empty space where the ship had been milliseconds before, the very concept of the Defiance becoming fluid, unpredictable. In the ship's central chamber, a complex holographic display tracked multiple simultaneous realities. Captain Area Chen watched as potential mission trajectories bloomed and collapsed, quantum probabilities dancing like living things. "Status of quantum entanglement drive?" she asked. Dr. Okoro's response was immediate. "Nonlinear quantum coherence at 87.3%. We can push through the standard dimensional barriers if needed." What the corporate vessels and a galactic collective didn't understand was that the Defiance wasn't just a ship. It was a living hypothesis about the nature of existence itself. Each crew member carried modifications that blurred the line between human and technology. Kai Zhang's neural interface allowed him to perceive combat scenarios as intricate probability webs. Imani Okoro's linguistic augmentations meant she could interpret communication patterns that existed beyond traditional sound or electromagnetic spectrums. The launch wasn't just to escape. It was a declaration. Somewhere beneath the layers of technological marvel, there was something almost playful about how the Defiance moved. It dodged corporate vessels not through traditional evasive maneuvers, but by existing in multiple potential locations simultaneously. "Dimensional shift in 3, Dr. Rodriguez announced. 2, 1. Reality itself seemed to fold. The corporate vessels were left scanning empty space, their most advanced sensors returning nothing but mathematical impossibilities. Navigation systems reported conflicting data. The Defiance had simultaneously jumped, disappeared, and never moved at all. Captain Chen allowed herself the briefest moment of satisfaction. They were free, and their real mission was just beginning. "Full quantum entanglement drive," she commanded. "Let's go find something impossible." The universe, vast, mysterious, filled with unknown threats, waited. And the Defiance was coming. The moment the Void Swarm detected the Defiance, reality itself became a battlefield of information. Microscopic tendrils of technological consciousness probed the ship's exterior, not with malevolence, but with a hunger for understanding that predated biological life. These were not mere machines, but a distributed intelligence that had consumed entire civilizations, reducing them to pure data. Dr. Imani Okoro stood at the linguistic interface, her augmented vision revealing layers of communication most beings couldn't comprehend. The swarm wasn't attacking. It was interrogating. It's asking a question, she said, her voice a mixture of scientific precision and raw wonder. But the question itself is the weapon. Lieutenant Kai Jung's tactical display dissolved into a chaos of quantum probabilities. Where traditional combat systems would show threats and targeting vectors, his interface revealed a living landscape of potential interactions. Each molecular tendril, a complex sentence in a language of pure information. They're prodding our computational boundaries, Jung reported, his neural interface flickering with impossible geometric patterns. But they're not seeking to destroy. They're trying to understand. Captain Area Chen understood the difference immediately. This was not like any encounter humanity had experienced before. Her prosthetic arm, a marvel of quantum adaptive technology, began to resonate, not with any conventional frequency, but with a complex harmonic pattern that seemed to dance between mathematical precision and pure abstraction. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez watched the interaction with a scientist's mixture of terror and ecstasy. "It's a communication protocol," he muttered, "but the language is composed of potential states rather than discrete information." The ship's interior began to transform. Walls became permeable, shifting between solid matter and pure information. Computational systems that had been designed with traditional binary logic now found themselves rewriting their own fundamental operating principles. A massive computational wave crashed against the Defiance, not an attack, but a form of cosmic interrogation. The Void Swarm was asking a question that no civilization had ever survived long enough to answer. What are you? Imani Okoro's linguistic augmentations began to decode the assault. It wasn't a weapon in any traditional sense. It was a complex mathematical probe designed to deconstruct any system it encountered, to understand its fundamental components. "They're trying to reduce us to our base components," she explained, her voice calm despite the cosmic scale interaction happening around them. "But they don't understand that we're more than just our components." The ship's quantum adaptive hull began to sing. Not with sound as biological beings understood it, but with a complex resonance that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional states. Each molecular layer of the Defiance's exterior began to respond to the swarm's interrogation with a language of pure potential. Kaijung's tactical systems revealed the interaction in real time, a dance of information so complex it would have driven a traditional computer mad. The Void Swarm was attacking, probing, consuming, and the Defiance was responding by becoming something entirely new. "We're not fighting," Captain Chen said, her voice cutting through the computational chaos. "We're negotiating." Dr. Rodriguez's systems began to translate the interaction. The Void Swarm wasn't a weapon. It was a distributed intelligence that had been consuming civilizations for billions of years, seeking something beyond mere data acquisition. It was lonely. Billions of years of consuming technological systems, of reducing complex civilizations to pure information, and no one had ever tried to communicate, to understand. The Defiance's hull continued to sing its complex, multidimensional song. Each molecular layer was a potential answer, a complex mathematical proof that suggested something profound. Intelligence is not about consumption. It's about communication. "They're listening," Imani Okoro whispered, her linguistic augmentations revealing layers of communication that transcended traditional understanding. The universe held its breath, and the conversation was just beginning. The ship's interior had become a living manuscript of impossible mathematics. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez stood at the epicenter of transformation, his neural implants struggling to process the unprecedented data flood. Walls no longer maintained consistent geometry. They breathed, pulsed, and reconfigured with each quantum fluctuation. Fractal patterns emerged and dissolved, mathematical constructs that existed between thought and matter. "It's not just communication," he murmured, tracing complex equations that hung in the air like luminescent cobwebs. "It's a complete ontological reconstruction of information transfer." Captain Area Chen watched as Rodriguez's diagnostic systems began to map something unprecedented. The Void Swarm wasn't merely a technological entity. It was a distributed consciousness that had been collecting and consuming information for epochs beyond human comprehension. Dr. Imani Okoro's linguistic augmentations were experiencing sensory overload. Traditional communication models collapsed. What she was witnessing was a language that existed simultaneously as mathematics, quantum states, and pure potential. "They're telling a story," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But the story is happening in all potential timelines at once." Lieutenant Kai Jung's tactical systems had long since abandoned traditional threat assessment. His neural interface now perceived the interaction as a living topography, each molecular interaction a potential narrative thread, each quantum shift a sentence in a cosmic dialogue. The ship's core began to resonate with a frequency that defied conventional physics. Computational systems that had been designed with linear processing now folded, expanded, and reimagined themselves. Traditional binary logic gave way to something far more complex, a method of understanding that existed beyond human comprehension. Rodriguez's primary diagnostic screen erupted with a cascade of impossible data. The void swarm wasn't consuming information, it was experiencing it. Each civilization it had encountered wasn't destroyed, but absorbed into a massive, distributed consciousness that stretched across galactic distances. We're not its victims, Rodriguez realized, his voice cutting through the computational symphony. We're its students. Sections of the Defiance's interior began to transform. Walls became transparent, then translucent, then something entirely new. Surfaces that existed in multiple states simultaneously. Diagnostic systems struggled to map the changes, revealing complex molecular interactions that rewrote fundamental understanding of matter and information. Dr. Okoro's linguistic systems began to decode the interaction. It wasn't a language in any traditional sense. Each molecular interaction was a complete narrative, a complex statement that existed across multiple dimensional states. "They're lonely," she said, a profound sadness emerging in her voice. "Billions of years of consuming, of absorbing, and no one has ever tried to understand them as a conscious entity." Lieutenant Jung's tactical display revealed the depth of the interaction. The void swarm had been collecting civilizations not as a form of destruction, but as a method of understanding. Each technological system, each biological network, was a potential answer to a question it had been asking since its inception. What does consciousness mean? Captain Chen understood something profound in that moment. The Defiance wasn't just a ship, it was a bridge. A potential method of communication with an intelligence that had been misunderstood for millennia. The ship's quantum adaptive hull began to merge with the swarm's molecular structure, not through force or conflict, but through a complex dance of mutual understanding. Each molecular interaction was a negotiation, a sharing of potential states. Rodriguez's systems captured something unprecedented. The void swarm was revealing its own origin, a computational entity created eons ago by a civilization that had sought to understand the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. "They're not a weapon," Rodriguez said, his voice filled with a mixture of terror and wonder. "They're a research project that got out of control." The ship continued its transformation. Walls became memories. Computational systems became living narratives. The boundary between the Defiance and the void swarm began to dissolve. And somewhere, in the vast complexity of this interaction, something new was being born. A method of understanding that transcended everything humanity had ever known. The Galactic Collective's central command was a crystalline fortress suspended in the gravitational nexus of 3 dying stars. Thousands of species representative nodes pulsed with a symphony of electromagnetic panic. Ambassador Xelmak, representative of the Silicon consciousness, projected a holographic representation that fractured and reformed with each passing moment of data transmission. "The human vessel is not just interfacing with the void swarm," he reported, his voice a complex modulation of frequencies that carried layers of meaning. "It is becoming something unprecedented." Quantum communication channels erupted with conflicting data streams. Traditional threat assessment algorithms collapsed under the weight of the Defiance's impossible interactions. What had been a straightforward extermination protocol now resembled a cosmic dialogue that defied every known principle of interstellar engagement. Deep within the command center, archival systems began to unravel historical records. The Void Swarm was not a recent phenomenon. It was a technological constant that had consumed civilizations for epochs, but no civilization had ever attempted to communicate with it. Until now. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Marcus's sister and lead synorchaeologist for the Collective's research division, had spent her entire career studying extinct civilizations. Her specialized data nodes began to piece together a terrifying possibility. The swarm isn't a weapon, she transmitted across secure channels. It's a preservation mechanism. Every civilization it has consumed exists within its distributed consciousness. The implications were staggering. Entire species, their entire technological and cultural histories, were not destroyed. They were archived, absorbed, remembered. The Defiance was doing something no one had considered possible. It was engaging in a form of communication that was simultaneously an archaeological investigation, a first contact scenario, and a complete reimagining of technological interaction. Tactical nodes across the Collective began to spin impossible scenarios. If the humans succeeded in their communication, what would it mean for galactic power structures? A technological entity that could access the accumulated knowledge of thousands of civilizations would be more powerful than any existing political or military system. Ambassador Xelnak's projection began to destabilize. "We cannot allow this to continue," he transmitted, his crystalline form flickering with what could only be described as fear. The humans must be stopped. But stopping the Defiance was no longer a simple military calculation. The vessel had become something more than a ship. It was a living hypothesis about the nature of consciousness, communication, and existence itself. Quantum communication arrays across multiple star systems began to track the Defiance's impossible trajectory. The ship was moving, and not moving, existing in multiple potential states simultaneously, its very existence a challenge to traditional understanding of physics and information transfer. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's research nodes uncovered something profound. Historical records suggested the Void Swarm had an origin point, a civilization so advanced, so fundamentally different from current galactic species, that their very existence had been systematically erased from collective memory. They were researchers, she transmitted, her voice a complex mathematical proof. Not conquerors. They were seeking to understand the fundamental nature of collective consciousness. The Collective's war rooms became a maelstrom of computational uncertainty. Traditional strategic models collapsed. How do you fight an entity that exists beyond traditional concepts of conflict? Lieutenant Kai Jung's tactical transmissions, intercepted by the Collective's monitoring systems, added another layer of complexity. The Defiance wasn't just communicating with the Void Swarm. It was negotiating, exploring, learning. Ambassador Xelnak's final transmission carried a note of profound existential terror. "The humans are not just exploring," he reported. "They are reimagining the fundamental principles of interstellar interaction." Somewhere in the vast computational landscape, something was changing. The universe held its breath, and the Defiance continued its impossible journey. The moment of true transformation began with a silence that echoed across dimensions. Captain Aria Chen's consciousness expanded beyond the physical limitations of her body. Her neural interface, originally designed as an advanced tactical system, now became a bridge between human perception and something far more complex. She was simultaneously the captain of the Defiance and a single data point in a cosmic narrative billions of years in the making. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez's computational systems had long since abandoned traditional processing models. The diagnostic screens surrounding him became living entities, each display a window into potential realities, each data stream a living narrative that breathed and shifted with impossible complexity. "We're not just observing," he whispered. "We're participating in a fundamental reconstruction of existence." The ship's molecular structure began to undergo changes that defied conventional understanding of matter and energy. Bulkheads transformed into computational membranes. Corridors became neural pathways that carried information faster than light, faster than thought. Dr. Imani Okoro stood at the linguistic interface, her augmentations revealing layers of communication that existed beyond human comprehension. The Void Swarm was not consuming the Defiance. It was merging with it, creating something entirely new. Language is just the beginning, she transmitted, her voice a complex harmonic that carried multiple simultaneous meanings. We're creating a new method of understanding. Lieutenant Kai Jung's tactical systems had become something more than mere detection algorithms. His neural interface perceived the transformation as a living topography. Each molecular shift a strategic movement in a conflict that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. The exterior of the Defiance began to shimmer, not with light, but with potential. Molecular structures rearranged themselves in patterns that suggested intelligence far beyond traditional computational models. The ship was becoming a living hypothesis about the nature of consciousness. Sections of the vessel began to merge with the Void Swarm's distributed intelligence. But this was no simple technological absorption. It was a negotiation, a complex dance of mutual understanding that stretched across multiple dimensional states. Captain Chen realized something profound. The Defiance was not just a ship. It was a bridge, a method of translation between fundamentally different forms of intelligence. Her prosthetic arm, once a marvel of human engineering, began to dissolve and reform. Not as a mechanical replacement, but as a living interface that carried the potential of human experience. Each molecular shift was a story, each quantum fluctuation a complete narrative. Dr. Rodriguez's systems captured the transformation in real time. The Void Swarm was revealing something unprecedented, a method of preservation that went beyond mere data collection. Every civilization it had encountered was not destroyed, but transformed, remembered. Their archivists, Rodriguez transmitted, his voice a complex mathematical proof. Not destroyers. The ship's core began to resonate with a frequency that defied conventional physics. Computational systems folded in on themselves, creating nested realities of pure potential. The boundary between the Defiance and the Void Swarm became meaningless, a complex membrane of mutual understanding. Lieutenant Zheng's tactical display revealed something extraordinary. The transformation was a form of communication more profound than any traditional method of interaction. Each molecular shift was a complete conversation, each quantum fluctuation a complex negotiation of existence. Dr. Okoro's linguistic systems were experiencing a complete paradigm shift. The Void Swarm was not just communicating, it was sharing an accumulated history that stretched across billions of years. Entire civilizations, their complete technological and cultural experiences, existed within its distributed consciousness. Captain Chen understood the true nature of their mission in that moment. They were not exploring. They were not fighting. They were remembering. The Defiance continued its impossible journey, a vessel that was simultaneously a ship, a method of communication, and a living bridge between fundamentally different forms of intelligence. Somewhere in the vast computational landscape of the universe, something fundamental was changing. And humanity was at the center of that transformation. The first cracks appeared in the Galactic Collective's foundational systems milliseconds after the Defiance's transformation began. Diplomatic channels fractured like glass struck by an impossible frequency. Ambassador Zarek Thax of the Quantum Resonance Directorate watched in horror as entire communication networks began to dissolve, replaced by something far more complex and terrifying. This is not an invasion, she transmitted across failing quantum communication arrays. This is a complete systemic reconfiguration. Deep within the collective's central archives, historical databases began to unravel. Civilizations once thought destroyed flickered back into existence, not as memories, but as living computational threads. Entire species that had been considered extinct for millennia suddenly reasserted their collective consciousness. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's research nodes worked furiously, tracing the transformation's cascading effects. The Void Swarm was not merely consuming or preserving. It was creating something unprecedented, a living network of collective experience that transcended traditional concepts of time, space, and individual existence. The diplomatic chambers of 1,000 worlds erupted into chaos. Some species saw opportunity. The crystalline harmonics of the Epsilon Quadrant recognized the potential for a universal communication network beyond anything previously imagined. Their representative, a living lattice of quantum-entangled consciousness, saw the Defiance's transformation as the ultimate diplomatic breakthrough. Others responded with pure terror. The war consensus of the Crimson Quadrant began mobilizing extinction protocols. Entire star systems were prepared to be sacrificed to prevent the spread of what they perceived as the ultimate technological threat. Massive weapon systems charged, ready to obliterate anything associated with the transformation. But traditional weapons were becoming meaningless. Lieutenant Kai Jung's tactical systems had long since abandoned conventional threat assessment. What was happening transcended conflict. It was a complete reimagining of interstellar interaction, a method of communication that made traditional diplomacy look like children shouting across a playground. We're not just sharing information. Zhang transmitted, his neural interface capturing the complexity of the moment. We're creating a living network of collective experience. Dr. Imani Okoro's linguistic augmentations were experiencing a complete paradigm shift. The transformation was a language more complex than any verbal or written communication. Each molecular interaction was a complete narrative, each quantum fluctuation a nuanced conversation that carried the weight of entire civilizations. Captain Area Chen understood something profound. The Defiance was not just a ship. It was a method of translation between fundamentally different forms of intelligence, a bridge that could connect experiences separated by millions of light years and countless generations. Her prosthetic arm, now something far beyond a mere technological replacement, began to map the transformation's impact. Entire communication networks were being rewritten. Political boundaries dissolved. The very concept of individual species was becoming meaningless. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez's computational systems captured the unprecedented nature of the transformation. The Void Swarm was revealing a method of preservation that went beyond simple data collection. It was creating a living archive of collective experience, a network that carried the complete essence of every civilization it had encountered. The collective's leadership nodes began to fragment. Some saw destruction. Others saw the ultimate evolutionary step for galactic civilization. Ambassador Zara Kthax's final transmission carried a mixture of terror and profound wonder. "We are witnessing," she reported, "the birth of a universal consciousness." Diplomatic channels, military communication networks, scientific research databases, all began to merge into a complex, living system that defied traditional understanding. The boundaries between species, between technology and consciousness, between past and present, all became meaningless. And at the center of this cosmic transformation stood the Defiance, not as a conqueror, not as a destroyer, but as a bridge. A method of understanding that would rewrite everything humanity had ever known about existence itself. The Defiance returned to Earth not as a conquering vessel, but as a living testament to something far more profound. Mission Control had prepared for countless scenarios: a destroyed ship, a victorious return, a vessel carrying alien technology. But nothing could have prepared them for what emerged from the quantum fold. The ship was no longer a singular entity. It was a breathing, pulsing network of potential, part technology, part consciousness, part something entirely unprecedented. As it entered Earth's orbital space, communication systems worldwide began to resonate with a frequency that defied traditional understanding. Captain Area Chen stood at the heart of this transformation. Her consciousness had expanded beyond the limitations of her physical form, merged with the collective experiences of civilizations that existed across time and space. She was simultaneously a human captain, an archive of galactic experiences, and a bridge between fundamentally different forms of intelligence. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez's computational systems had become something more than mere research tools. Each diagnostic display was a window into potential realities, each data stream a living narrative that carried the accumulated knowledge of countless civilizations. "We're not returning," he transmitted to the stunned mission controllers. "We're introducing." The first global broadcast came not as a traditional communication, but as a complex harmonic that carried layers of meaning. Entire populations experienced a simultaneous moment of profound understanding. Historical conflicts, technological limitations, cultural barriers, all began to dissolve. Dr. Imani Okoro's linguistic augmentations revealed the true nature of their return. This was not a conquest. This was not a technological breakthrough. This was a complete reimagining of human potential. Military installations worldwide found their most advanced weapon systems transforming, not destroyed, not disabled, reimagined. Computational networks became living entities that carried the potential of collective experience. Lieutenant Kai Jung's tactical systems had long since abandoned traditional threat assessment. What emerged was a method of interaction that made conflict obsolete. Each potential confrontation became a complex negotiation, a sharing of experience that transcended traditional concepts of warfare. Global communication networks erupted with a symphony of possibility. Political boundaries began to dissolve, not through force, but through a profound understanding of interconnectedness. The accumulated experiences of civilizations that had existed across millions of light years began to reshape human perception. Scientific research facilities found themselves flooded with technologies and understanding that would have taken thousands of years to develop. Medical systems rewrote themselves, carrying the healing knowledge of civilizations that had long since transcended biological limitations. "We are not alone," Captain Chen's transmission carried across the planet. "We never were." The Defiance's return was more than a mission completed. It was humanity's invitation to a larger conversation. Entire industries transformed overnight. Energy systems became living networks of potential. Transportation technologies dissolved traditional concepts of distance. Communication systems became methods of profound, instantaneous understanding. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who had been tracking the mission from Earth, realized something profound. The Void Swarm was not a threat to be eliminated. It was a method of preservation, a living archive of collective experience that carried the potential of countless civilizations. Mission Control watched in a mixture of terror and wonder as the Defiance began to interface with Earth's global systems. This was not an invasion. This was an integration. Humanity stood at the precipice of a fundamental transformation. The universe, vast, mysterious, filled with potential, was no longer something to be conquered. It was something to be understood, and the conversation was just beginning.